committed to delivering nothing less than our best.
To make sure you always have the coverage.
Social Security 45.
Happy anniversary, Social Security.
Good evening and welcome to our virtual panel discussion. My name is Camilla Lawrence, Public Relations of the Social Security Board. At this time, we stand for prayer by Manager of the Benefits Department, Mr. Wallen Shiverton.
Good evening, everyone. Shall we pray? Our loving God and most gracious Heavenly Father, how thankful we are for moments like these. Your word declares to us, you know the thoughts that you have towards us, thoughts of good and not of evil, to give us a hope and a future. And it's with this principle we are so thankful that you have blessed the Social Security Board for 45 years, and how we pray your continued blessing upon the fund. Give vision and wisdom to the leaders and everyone who make up the staff, the board, and members of the Social Security population. We are so thankful for this panel discussion tonight and how we pray your continued blessing upon the panelists, the moderator, create an atmosphere of fruitful discussion and understanding for those who are joining us via the digital media platforms. We pray your blessings upon everything tonight, and we would give thanks in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. We'll remain standing for the playing of the national anthem.
And of beauty, our country might be supposed, thy children stand free on the strength of will and love. With nothing of our struggles, Saint Kitts and Nevis be. All nation come together with a common destiny. As stalwarts we stand for justice and liberty. With wisdom and truth, we will serve and honor thee. No storm must be conquered, for God will show defense. His blessings shall forever to posterity extend.
Thank you. Be seated. Good evening, all. Former Minister of Social Security, the Honorable Sam Conda, former Chairman, Mr. Ernest Pistana, Director of Social Security, Mr. Christopher Lloyd, esteemed panelists, Dr. Valda Henry, Deputy Governor, Eastern Caribbean Central Bank, Mr. Stuart Haynes, Executive Director, National Insurance Services, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Ms. Marilyn Johnson, Chief Financial Officer, Social Security Board, our moderator, Mr. Everett Weber Herbert, Von Radio, invited guests, management and staff attendees, both virtually and in-house, good evening. It is with great pleasure that I welcome you to the hosting of this panel discussion on the very important topic of the future of Social Security on the occasion of the 45th anniversary of the St. Christopher and Nevis Social Security Fund. The theme for the observance, Transform, Reform, Thrive, perfectly posits the critical juncture of our existence as a mature fund, performing our mission to provide sound financial management and efficient administration while being conscious of the need to transform and reform our operations to thrive way beyond 45 years. This forum provides another great opportunity to share with our stakeholders the value of Social Security, not just to St. Kitts Nevis, but to the social fabric of any society, as well as share our experiences, best practices, and promote the message of the sustainability of the fund. We invite you to listen keenly and to make meaningful contributions to the discourse at the appropriate time. The moderator will announce the opportune time to share the opportune time. We encourage you also to share the link or live and to continue the conversation of Social Security even after the panel has ended. Once again, we warmly welcome you to this insightful engagement and look forward to the development of the key areas to be discussed. Welcome. I now introduce the moderator for the evening. Everett Weber Herbert is a graduate of the University of the Virgin Islands. He is currently the manager of Run Radio and hosts the Let's Talk That Gets Results show for over 3 decades and has hosted numerous discussions, interviews, and debates on a variety of topics. Everett Weber Herbert has received many awards from civil society, international and regional organizations for his work in broadcasting. Tonight, it's my pleasure to introduce our moderator, Mr. Everett Weber Herbert. Mr. Herbert?
Good evening, and thank you very much. Let me first begin by thanking the Social Security Board for inviting me and indeed making me a part of their 45th anniversary. I have personal interest in it as well, because I'm a member and a part owner of the Social Security Fund. And indeed, the discussion tonight, I think, is going to be of great interest, especially against the backdrop of not only the St. Kitts Nevis Social Security Fund, but the funds across the islands and across the globe. There's been great discussion on those. And perchance, if we go along the way and I don't ask a very pertinent question which will create some controversy, please remind me to do so, because I have a very interesting question for the experts. Again, thank you very much for your invitation. Tonight, we have 3 panelists. And Ms. Johnson is on my right, Dr. Valder is on my left, and we have virtually Mr. Johnson.
No, Mr. Haynes. Mr. Haynes.
Mr. Haynes, sorry. Yes, maybe I'm getting things, because I did say Miss Johnson, right?
Yes.
Okay. So the format we're going to use this evening, we're going to introduce to you the 3 panelists. And then each will give a presentation for approximately 10 minutes. We'll give the introductions of each, and then the introduction, and then following each presentation, we have a discussion. We get it? Okay. And here we go, first with Ms. Johnson. Ms. Johnson, Marilyn P. Johnson, is the Chief Financial Officer of the St. Christopher Nevis Social Security Board, where she has worked for 30 years in various capacities. Professionally, she is a certified public accountant, CPA, a certified internal auditor, CIA, and a certified management accountant, CMA. She is a member of the Eastern Caribbean Institute of Certified Chartered Accountants. She holds a master's degree in finance, and she is also a chartered director. Her interest in people and community development caused her to serve as a volunteer on the Saddlers Community Council and the Special Olympics Committee of St. Kitts and Nevis. Ms. Johnson believes that she can change the world by positively influencing one person at a time, because that person will in turn make a difference. Church life. Marilyn Johnson grew up in a Seventh-day Adventist home and has held many offices in the church from a very young age. She is now the treasurer and one of the elders of her local church congregation on St. Kitts, Miss Marilyn Johnson. Dr. Valda Frederica Henry is the Deputy Governor General of the Eastern Caribbean Central Bank. She is VF Incorporated former Chief Executive Officer and Principal Trainer. She formerly served as a Senior Investment Officer at the Eastern Caribbean Central Bank and played an instrumental role in the restructuring of the investment unit and the development of the investment management framework of the bank. She has lectured in, among other subjects, human resource management and accounting, and has extensive experience in organizational reviews, job analysis and jobs description, working with companies in the Caribbean, and served as a coordinator of the administrative reform program of the Commonwealth of Dominica. She has served as a mentor for executive and middle managers in the many sectors, including banking, hospitality, and utility. Valda is also a global human resource and organizational development expert who excels at collaboration with very strong interpersonal communications, leadership, and decision-making skills. She has developed and led numerous multi-year personal and professional development programs for youth in Dominica, as well as individuals and businesses throughout the Caribbean. Valda holds formal qualifications in financial analysis and planning, governance and business management. She's a chartered financial analyst and holds a PhD in industrial relations and business, Masters of Business Administration, among many other academic qualifications. Dr. Frederica Henry. And via Zoom, Mr. Stuart Haynes. Mr. Stuart Haynes currently serves as the Director of the St. Vincent and the Grenadines National Insurance Services, a position he has held since February 2017. He is a Fellow of the Faculty and Institute of Actuaries and a Chartered Financial Analyst by profession. In 2018, Mr. Haynes was elected to the Bureau of the International Social Security Association based in Geneva, Switzerland. Further, in 2020, he was appointed the ISSA's Vice Chairperson of the Technical Commission on Investment of Social Security Funds, and also appointed as a member of the ISSA's Finance Committee of the Triennium 2023 to 2025. In addition to his capacity as Director of the NIS, Mr. Haynes is currently serving as a Director of the Financial Services Authority, the Eastern Caribbean Financial Holding Company, and the Eastern Caribbean Home Mortgage Bank. Mr. Stuart Haynes holds a BSc in Actuarial Science from the London School of Economics and Political Science, in MSc in Actuarial Management from Cass Business School, London, with a specialty in investment management. Please welcome Mr. Haynes. So those are our three esteemed panels for this evening. We will first hear from Ms. Johnson.
Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator. Please allow me to adopt the protocol that was established. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure to be here, and this evening I will be sharing with you information on the St. Kitts and the Nevis Social Security System which is typical of most of the social security systems in our region. In doing so, I will share with you how Social Security, St. Kitts and Nevis Social Security was established, the purpose and principles of Social Security, a brief profile on St. Kitts and Nevis Social Security today, and then I'll share with you some of our challenges and the future outlook. 45 years ago, on the 1st of February 1978, the St. Kitts and Nevis Social Security was established. This system replaced the National Provident Fund, which we normally refer to as the NPF. This was a mandatory savings scheme, which our leaders then realized that this saving system was inadequate to provide the necessary protection for those workers who were especially vulnerable. And so Social Security was introduced. Social Security provides a safety net for the protection of workers. It also covers a larger range of benefits, including pensions, sickness, maternity, etc. The late E. St. John Payne, who was then the Minister of Social Security and Labor, indicated in his book on the history of Social Security in St. Kitts and Nevis, he pointed out that the purpose of Social Security system in the Federation was to protect especially the large number of workers, especially in the sugar industry. In his book, I quote, he said, he was concerned that persons who were unable to continue employment in the sugar industry due to sickness, old age, invalidity, etc., often found themselves on the economic and the social scrap heap without means of support. Hence the need and the introduction of Social Security. So what is Social Security all about? Social Security is a form of social protection. Everyone in the community come together for the benefit of all. That's why it is a mandatory system. It provides a mechanism for individuals to save for their retirement and other contingencies such as sickness, maternity, invalidity. Everyone contributes to that safety net. Everyone pool their resources together, and from that pool, funds are redistributed to those who are mostly in need of it at the point of illness or retirement. Social Security is a subsistence level, provides subsistence level of benefits. Benefits which help to preserve the dignity of the worker. The St. Kitts and Nevis Social Security has a component called assistance, pension, or benefit. Now, this assistance is paid to persons who are in need, even though some of them may not have contributed to Social Security. It is consistent with its being consistent with its mandate. Improvements have been made to the Social Security system over the years. In 1986, the employment injury benefit was introduced, and then in 1996, the self-employed coverage was introduced. This was in recognition of the fact that employment arrangements had changed significantly in the Federation, where we had quite a number of persons going into self-employment, and hence the need to provide that coverage. It also provides coverage for housewives who were not originally under the umbrella of Social Security. We paid almost
28,000 persons benefits, totaling $131 million. Currently, we pay about 8,000 pensioners monthly to the tune of $10 million. Many citizens in St. Kitts and Nevis depend on Social Security as their main source of income, especially during old age. Social Security has been successful in mobilizing resources which contribute to economic stability in our federation. And so the question is, what would our federation be like without a Social Security system? But like any other mature Social Security system, we have our challenges. The Social Security is mature. It is a partially funded Social Security system, benefit system. And so, like most Social Security systems that are mature, we have reached our, what we call our first inflection point. That is, our contributions are less than the benefits that we pay. And that's a challenge. The number of contributors per pensioner continue to decline. In a pay-as-you-go system, the current workers finance the pensions of the current pensioners, and over the years, the number of pensioners per contributor continue to get less and less. The number of contributors per pensioner gets less and less. We have also seen an increase in benefits expenditure as more and more people qualify for old age benefits and at a higher rate than before. Then we have the issue of non-compliance and collection of contributions and monitoring of employers who deduct the Social Security contribution from the wages of their employees and pay it into Social Security. We have to have a rigorous system of monitoring the employers to ensure that they comply with the Social Security regulations and pay the required contributions so that we can finance the benefits for our insured persons. Then we have an increase in the informal sector, and as this sector grows, it is difficult to monitor them and to get them to pay their Social Security contributions. And recently, we have had the effect of COVID-19 on expenditure and contribution income. We also have seen the need to improve our investment performance. Social Security is financed by contributions and investment income. And once the contribution income is less than the benefits being paid, the rest of the benefit is financed by our investment income. Soon, if our benefits expenditure exceed both our contribution and investment income, we will start to deplete the Social Security reserve. Now, with those challenges, how do we move forward? We need to leverage information technology to make our operations more effective and more efficient. We need to improve performance so that we can meet the needs of our customers through a review of our internal processes. We need to improve communication and the engagement of our stakeholders. Then we need to review and improve our systems for better monitoring and for the collection of the contributions. We also need a more efficient system that will meet the needs of the self-employed persons, especially those who are in the informal sector. We need to implement reform initiatives for the sustainability of the Social Security Fund. If we do nothing now, we would end up with an unsustainable Social Security system. And with all of us depending on Social Security, whether currently or for the future, that, of course, is not a desired future for us. And so, Social Security has to take its fiduciary responsibility seriously. And as such, we are committed to do what is necessary to ensure that the fund remains sustainable for years to come, so that it can meet the needs of our citizens and their beneficiaries. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. The presentation from Ms. Johnson, and now we can engage her in some of the points that she had made, and then we'll go on to our second presenter. I perhaps would like to lead off with a question for Ms. Johnson in reference to the fund and the suggestion you made about improving the collections, etc. Some of the problems that you identified with the collections of the funds for the Social Security, and I would like to know whether any analysis has been done with the behavior of the society in terms of non-compliance to rules and regulations. Do you think that has anything to do with the fact that we have the non-compliance in the Social Security Fund as well?
Okay, and generally there seem to be an attitude of non-compliance. Rules are there to be broken, but I think it goes beyond that. It's a number of reasons for non-compliance. There are, of course, those who just try to evade the law and try to escape, hide under the radar. But there are some who may not have proper systems in place, management systems, systems for keeping track. They operate on a very informal basis, and so they find it very difficult to come and to pay Social Security. Also, the management of the business in terms of the funds, because the employers, they deduct 5% of the employees' wages, and once they don't remit it to Social Security, it begs the question, what do they do with it? Sometimes it's because their businesses are not properly operated financially, and so they don't make it a priority to pay Social Security.
But if it mirrors the society,
yes,
how do we fix that? Because if that's a given,
yes,
in accounting we make provision for bad debts.
yes.
Do we make such provisions and take that into consideration when you are determining whether or not the Social Security Fund will be viable in the next 20, 30 years?
Yes, we do make provision. We do make provision. But education is important. The employer understands the importance of paying Social Security, and we probably need to appeal to their sense of loyalty and commitment to their worker, because if they recognize how the worker will be disadvantaged, we have seen cases where persons come for their pension and they are appalled to see the small size of the pension, and when they inquire, they would have worked for employers who just refuse to pay their contributions.
In reference to the fact that you had mentioned the viability, if we do not, you had mentioned that the contributions are now less than what you And so you're suggesting that in the next maybe decade, 2 decades, the Social Security Fund, if nothing is done, we will be basically bankrupt.
Yes, if nothing is done. And here is where reform comes in.
Do we have any questions for Ms. Johnson from the audience? Not at the minute. We can come back to you, but why don't we then move on to the presentation from Dr. Valde Henry.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Good evening to the CEO, Chris Loard, and congratulations. The former minister, Mr. Kondo, former chair, Mr. Pistana, though not present, the chair of the board, Mrs. Janet Harris, and the other board members, I think I see Ms. Michelle O'Brien at the back, all the management and staff of the Social Security Board who are here, our panelists this evening, Mrs. Johnson, CFO, and Mr. Stuart Haynes, Executive Director of NIS St. Vincent, our moderator, Mr. Everett Herbert. I know my ECCB colleagues are looking on, so I say a special good evening to Governor as well as the other ECCB persons. Good evening. So our presentation is on the Social Security Administration, good governance, socio-political framework, financial structures, I swear I corrected that F, and still here, and limitations. So that's the Vice President. So our key messages, I'll be looking at 4 key things: the principles of good governance, the administration of social security systems, social security governance, and final remarks. So the key message here is that good governance, in fact we will talk about the principles of good governance as outlined by the ISA, but we'll also draw on work that I did looking at the governance structures of social securities in the OECS and how it impacts performance. And what is interesting in terms of the findings, and there will be a slide to show that, is that we cover some of the key things, areas, though maybe termed slightly differently. We cover 5 of the 5, but my study showed that there is an additional element for the sustainability of social security, and that is the investment diversification of its portfolio. So the investment of social security funds is a key component of the governance of social security, and we will come to that. So what is good governance? In fact, the studies go back and say governance as a topic and a big issue got prominence from 1923 with Burles and Means, who first determined that governance was critical with the separation of owners and managers. And once you had that separation, there was this agency. And when we look at Social Security, we can say that Social Security is an agent of the people, because Social Security invests funds or receive funds on behalf of who? The contributors, the workers, to give them what? A benefit when it's due, either through the short-term benefits while they are still workers and contributing, but very importantly, as pensioners. Because we know that this is really the key, because Anne Marilyn mentioned it, that Social Security is the major pillar of income for persons in retirement. Some persons have other income. Some person, maybe it's a small, minuscule amount for them. But for the majority of the people in St. Kitts as well as in the OECS, Social Security is the major pillar. For some persons, it's their only pillar. Without Social Security, they cannot survive. They will be more than destitute. And that is why it is so important that Social Security, the governance arrangements in Social Security, has to be a top-notch. Marilyn spoke about the fiduciary responsibility, and that is critical. And what is a fiduciary? A fiduciary is a person who puts the interests of the person who they represent above theirs. And so the board members, the management and the staff of Social Security, they are all in that fiduciary relationship to the contributors, meaning that the interests of the contributors must take precedence over any and all other interests. So, looking at the definition by ISA, the manner in which the vested authority uses its power to achieve the organization's objectives. And truly, it is really not an end to itself, it's a means to an end. In fact, when we have good governance systems in place, things just kind of fall naturally well. When we have poor governance, it leads to a lot of poor decisions, it leads to moral hazards for persons in the system. And so who must adopt it? It's critical for the board of directors and the executive management, as well as the governments, nationally. And we'll spend a little time more maybe talking about the board of directors, because truly, the board of directors is the body that's responsible for policy formulation and oversight of the social security systems. And while in our systems, and if you look at the acts for all of the systems, the board is appointed by the minister. So the minister is the appointing agent. But who is responsible? It's not the minister. It is the board. So and oftentimes we sometimes have that little confusion in our region, and you will see where persons, and if you take a poll around St. Kitts, as well as in any of the OECS, one of the charges they lay against Social Security is what? It is politicized. That the persons who are placed on boards are not necessarily the best persons for the board. The persons who are placed on boards are not necessarily looking at the best interests of the Social Security, but pandering to the wishes and the demands of the government. Truth is, governance is, and especially if we recognize our fiduciary responsibility. And my study demonstrated that is really not, persons have the argument, it's really not how people get appointed to the board that's important. It is who is appointed to the board that's a critical factor. And we'll come to that. Because in countries like, say, Dominica, where to a large extent the government can appoint the entire board, it doesn't make provisions for trade union congress, it doesn't make provisions for employers organization or those things. In other countries, say like Antigua and Grenada, these are the ones with the two strongest mechanism, you can say, for appointing. Because in these two countries, the member government, the employers association and the trade union congress actually nominate the majority of the board. Yet in those two countries, we had a lot of governance issues over the years. So it really proves it's not so much how people get appointed. And St. Kitts, actually, where in some cases in the early years, members of government were actually board members. You found that there was some better governance mechanisms. You found that government, even when they, invested in treasury bills, even if, yes, when it matured, they renewed, but they actually sent in the cash. Their contributions were generally paid on time. And you would say, but that shouldn't be if we take the argument about the how. So it's not how the board gets appointed that is critical, it's who gets appointed on the board of directors. And so ISA, in their study, shows out 5 principles of good governance. Accountability, and we know that, because I always say without accountability, there is no performance. We have to hold people to account. So the board has to hold the management and staff to account, the minister must hold the board to account, and the contributors must hold the entire Social Security to account. But we'll see that that is one of the areas where we really need to enhance in terms of Social Security governance, in terms of how do we communicate, and Marilyn alluded to that, about the need for education, but how do we communicate to persons? Do we give them an account of themselves, of what we do on their behalf? And while I was the chair of the Social Security in Dominica, one of the things we introduced was a stakeholders annual stakeholders meeting. It was similar to an AGM, That's not required by law, but we felt it was critical to provide that kind of openness and transparency. While yes, we always prepared the financial statements and you had them available for persons to take, the truth is, how many people really read that? And so the AGM, the stakeholders meeting, gave them an opportunity to come and ask questions. We actually had training for the media to kind of show them what are the kind of probing questions you need to ask, to enhance the accountability and the transparency. Predictability in terms, and that is akin to professionalism, that the laws must be applied consistently. There cannot be one law, the law is interpreted for one set of persons one way, another set of persons a different way. They said, no, it has to be predictable. Persons have to know what their benefits, what are the conditions for getting their benefits, what are their responsibilities and their rights, and it has to be consistently applied across beneficiaries, work contributors. Dynamism, saying that we have to keep abreast of what's happening. The world is changing. The world of work is changing. And we know that, especially even coming after COVID. There were lots of demands placed on the Social Security that were not there before. And I'm sure, like most of the other Social Securities following COVID, though it was not in the law, and it was not one of the benefits that Social Security offered to pay, but most Social Securities after COVID found themselves paying what? An unemployment benefit. Because many of their work contributors had become unemployed because the offices were laid out. But even without that, many Social Securities also saw what? Sickness benefit increasing. Why? Because in the early days and for most of the countries, when persons were placed in quarantine for 2 weeks or 3 weeks, they couldn't work. Employers in some cases would not pay. Who covered that slack? It was Social Security. And so it's how do we always remain on top? And of course, participation, talking about engagement of all. I will move on that because I kind of explained it as I was speaking. In my study, one of the things that came out very clearly were the 6 elements that were critical for success for Social Securities. And they match back very well if they find. One, accountability and transparency, and they remain the same. Autonomy and independence, that was key. That the board had to have that independence and autonomy from the political sector. And while you work with the minister, while you work with the government, and we will see that Social Security has a role to play in that, but that autonomy of making decisions in the best interests was critical. Partnership building, same like participation, involvement of the stakeholders, education and sensitization for that sector was critical. And as you begin your reform initiatives, you recognize that this is going to be key to your success, the involvement of persons across the sectors. And that is one of the reasons I even advocate not just for tripartite board, but multi-party board that includes not just the workers and government and the employers, but even within the employers we have the differences between the formal and the informal. Maybe a rep from each, as well as the beneficiaries, the board to be expanded to include that. And then the investment, the diversification of the investment portfolio, that came out really big in the study that was done, that for Social Securities in the OECS to survive, that was critical. The diversification of the investment portfolio, the greater focus on investments than had been previously, attention been paid previously. So again, what is the approach of that in terms of the financial sustainability of the fund, the investment management, contributors and beneficiaries, and the human and the ICT resources? And Marilyn spoke about that in terms of, enhancing, leveraging IT for greater efficiency. And you'll see that is going to be critical. And using the human resource. It is not cliche, when people say that the human resource is your most important resource. It's not cliche at all. These studies continue to show that even in the private sector, companies that do well and that do well on a long-term consistent basis, when you identify it right down, one of the key components of the success is having the right people in the right places. It's not just about bodies. It's having the right people in the right places. Because you can have 200 staff, but if it's not the right 200 staff, what happens? It doesn't work. And Social Security is a bit different. It's unique. It's not like any other job. I always say Social Security, persons come to Social Security in most cases at their most vulnerable points. So yes, they're contributing and okay, they're healthy and well. But that's not where they will. If you give some of them a chance, they would not even contribute, and Marilyn spoke about that. But when do they come to you? They come during sickness. They come during accidents. They come during death. They come for pensions. They come for maternity. And one of the things life has shown us is that every maternity case is not a happy case. Every maternity case does not result in a happy, bouncy, healthy baby. And so when they come to us at this point, how do you serve? So it has to be a service of compassion, service of the heart, even while we competently do what we have to do. Again, I cannot speak on that, so I'll just move along. So if you have any questions, they'll come back to me. And so if we look at the 4 administrative key areas that we're focusing on, I mentioned that, but you see what is in the middle there? To make all of these 4 things come together, the HR, the IT, all of that, what is right in the core, the center of this? Effective leadership. Because even if we have all the pieces doing their pieces well, but if there is not that gel, that coordination, it doesn't come together. Leadership is critical. I often say that culture comes from the top, never from the bottom. And the leaders must lead well. They must lead effectively so that the staff can follow. Nobody wants to follow someone who doesn't look like they know what they're doing or where they're going. And that is why that is so critical for the success. And so governments have their part to play too. Why? Because Social Security, as Marilyn said, is a pillar of social protection. If we look at all our Social Securities, they are government instituted institutions. So, and do you know that St. Kitts is the country that propelled the movement for Social Security in our OECS in the 1950s for the sugar factory, the pension that was first instituted, and the St. Kitts Trades Union agitated for pension for the weekly paid workers, because the first pension that was instituted was only for the monthly paid workers who had served more than 10 years and who were 50 and above. And it was the trade union that agitated. In 1954, a pension was then paid. And then when the British government sent in an actuary, Mr. Clark, and then a Newton, they recommended, instead of Social Security, which is what they wanted, the Provident Funds, and that is how Provident Funds got introduced in our OECS. St. Kitts being the first country to have introduced a Provident Fund in 1968. And then they moved to Social Security, and Antigua in the OECS is the first Social Security established in 1970. Antigua has a little interesting story with that, because in 1970 the legislation was passed for a Provident Fund. The government changed, and when they changed, they decided, no, you're not doing the Provident Fund. They would go straight into the Social Security. So that's how they became the first of the OECS countries to introduce Social Security. So government has a role to play, and has a role to recognize the critical importance of Social Security. And when we come to the, what happened? Okay, great job. Okay, so again, the national consensus, you can look at that. What are the goals of the fund? And we all know what it is, you know, to hold the authority through the legislation to give it its legal teeth. And all of the social securities are, yes, most of them are statutory bodies, but legal entities in their own right, you know, to collect it, to serve. Again, the development to formulate the bigger plan. Because remember, we said it's just one peel of the social protection mechanisms and programs. And if you go for out of the countries, you have different mechanisms. And St. Kitts is actually quite, has maybe one of the stronger social protection mechanisms. Because in addition to the social security that's there, you have the old age pensioners, but in terms of the home for the children, the orphans and children who are disadvantaged, St. Kitts has a more, I would say, a more structured segment to that, and that has been there for a while longer than most of the other countries, and so on. So again, that is part of the government's role. Again, to ensure the sustainability, and we'll come to that a little bit, that when we talk about sustainability, the question also comes up always, and we will see that, is should Social Security facilitate economic development? Should Social Security invest in government projects? And you know, there is a big debate on that. And persons say, oh, they're taking Social Security money and they're doing this and they're doing that. The truth is, Social Security has a role to play. Because Social Security is the largest mobilizer of savings. Not even the commercial banks. The largest mobilizer of saving is Social Security. So if the largest mobilizer of saving is Social Security, what do we need for investment and for growth? Is our savings to then invest. But what has to be done is not the ad hoc way. And Dr. Samuel Wendell Samuel, when he was at ECCB, he had written this paper on Social Security investments. And even Mario St. Rose, the former CDB president. And what they both of them argue is that Social Security has a role to play. But Social Security funds should not be used for recurrent expenditure of governments. So it should not be used to pay salary shortfalls. It should not be used, it should be used for capital investment that has a return. So maybe not roads, because road has no return, because we don't charge anybody tolls here. But on a project where there is going to be return, and it has to be done in a strategic manner. And that's one of the reasons I advocate that Social Security is, the board of the Social Security needs to meet with the government when they're planning their budget and with their plans to see where Social Security can assist without compromising its own financial health. Because Social Security has to ensure that it can fulfill its key mandate even while it serves. And studies done also too within the wider Caribbean by Professor Calfiedo and Dr. Alfio Lafourcade argues that point also for the role of Social Security in that regard. And again, when we look at the socio-political factors in terms of the demography and health, and Marilyn spoke about that, what do we see? An aging population. So we have more pensioners than we have contributors. The dependency ratio is now higher. So that is one of the reasons to why the reform for Social Securities are critical. Again, the health. One of the things that, what are we seeing with health now? A lot of young people are suffering all sorts of illness. NCDs are now no longer just relegated to older people. And if our young persons, and there was a time in the 90s, early 2000, all Social Securities were being impacted by AIDS, because a lot of the working population was impacted. And it means if our young people are ill and the working force health is compromised, what does that mean? The financial base, the revenue base for Social Security gets compromised, and we need to look at that. And then, of course, the labor markets, unemployment, the impact of unemployment. High unemployment is not good for us, because our key source of revenue for Social Security is where? The contributions. And so it's not in our best interest to have higher unemployment. And again, that is where the studies show, and even in Monbaga in 1995 for Africa, showed that this is the role that Social Security has to play to kind of foster economic growth for countries. And when we look at even the political orientation, because when Social Securities were introduced in our region, there were two main aims for Social Security. Those governments who felt Social Security was part of their social protection pillar, and governments who saw it as part of the economic pillar. And if you look at how they operated, you can see two different approaches. Those who for social protection, they were the ones where you had, where government was maybe more responsible in its relationship with Social Security, and those who saw it for economic development, but not really economic development in the sense of growing the economy, because most of their investments of their relationships were not for capital projects, but for recurrent expenditure. And those who saw it as an extension of their treasury, we saw that really not healthy relationships. They were not paying their contributions. They were not paying their, the interest on treasury bills and bonds and so on. And so that impacted. I'm coming to the end. And so enhancing good governance requires, again, enhancing the administrative capacity and reducing costs for enhanced ICT infrastructure, supports the point that Marilyn made. Ensuring board members are qualified, competent persons of integrity, because the studies show that the persons of integrity is a critical component for that. And their skills are enhanced, promote financial sustainability for the diversification of the investment portfolio, as well as the increased pace of the parametric reforms that are necessary, enhance accountability and transparency, including publication of financial statements, education and stakeholder consultations, and a strengthened multi-party relationship that is between government, employers, workers. In fact, all parties must come together to work for the common good. And I have one, that's my last slide. It doesn't look like it wants to cooperate with me. But in essence, we're seeing that governance is a critical component for Social Security administration, for Social Security sustainability. And Social Security has to be sustainable because our region depends on it. Social Security has to be sustainable and there for the long run, because for many persons, that's their only source. Many persons who say to you, when I went to it, was my research across the country, I could find at least one, and I got more than one person, but in every island I went, and when I was interviewing persons, I found persons who said to me, one lady in St. Vincent stands out to me because she said at the time, she said, I know on her first day, because she got paid weekly, and some Social Security actually have now moved to that for the smaller pension. I can leave, where she is, put my pot on fire, go into town, and I know when I come back, there is something to put in that pot without fail. And the Social Security is, persons are depending on you to survive. You cannot afford to disappoint. Thank you.
So we thank Dr. Henry for her presentation. We have one other presenter left, but I think I'll ask a question that I came prepared to ask because of the content of Dr. Henry's presentation. And you had mentioned the studies that you have been doing the research, and you mentioned across the OECS. And actuaries will tell you that one of the problems with the Social Security funds is numbers. We need more people contributing. So one of the suggestions is to increase the population, the young population. Did you consider in your studies the OECS as an amalgamation, much as banks do, so that you get the numbers? You have St. Kitts, Nevis Social Security, Antigua, Dominica, etc. Did anybody look into that and see whether or not, when you crunch the numbers, etc., if that will cause a viable Social Security?
Actually, this study didn't show that, but I will say to you, in fact, even that was one of the variables that was used, but it didn't come out as significant. In fact, what came out as more significant for the sustainability of the Social Security was the investment of the funds of the Social Security. And while the numbers are important in terms of age dependency and all of that, what it again demonstrates is that if you have, and we have to go back to the history of Social Security and the format of Social Security, because Social Securities in our region were designed on the pay-as-you-go system. That says that the design is that every 30 years, which is a generation, there is supposed to be a reform, increasing contribution, increasing stuff, and so on. But over the years, what has happened when the actuaries would have come, they would make recommendations to make the benefits a little bit more relevant. So they would say, well, increase it by 5% and so on. But they would also say to increase the contribution rate to match. If you check the history, most of our governments, if any, while they would increase the benefits that the actuary would say to increase, did not increase the contribution rates. And so what has happened is a mismatch over the years. Let us take Social Security that's 45 years old, meant for 30 years, after 30 years for contribution rate to increase. Has it been increased?
Did you find a reason why they don't increase the rates?
Oh, well, that's so easy to determine. Most of it is political because they...
And hence, you mentioned the importance of government. Well, do you not find that it becomes a power play?
Well, it is a power play, and that is where the autonomy is important, and that is where the studies show the autonomy, that the Social Security has the autonomy, that if there is a need to be increased based on those things go through. So that is what is important, and it is clear. And the point that you made, the Social Securities over years have discussed not coming together as one Social Security, but coming together as one in terms of investment, to pool their investment. Because that way, when, Dominica go with 200 million, the St. Kitts go with 500 million, they then become like a minuscule percentage in one of these big investment firms. And they give them not so much intention. But if they come as a pool to invest their funds, and there's been a lot of papers done on that. There was a paper done on that. I actually even worked on a paper like that. And so persons get their fund, the income is split based on the percentage of the investment you have placed. And there was a good talk on it, but it never really moved much. And I'll tell you why. Because in some of the countries, the government did not encourage foreign investments, because for most parts those things had to be invested on the foreign market. Some actually forbid it, some require government approval for it to happen, and so that was why that hadn't happened. And ECCB at one point had come in to discuss. That's how I got interested in Social Security, actually, because I was sent to work with the Social Security. The first one who had requested was Grenada, to look at that and to see how we could come together as the OECS, ECCU Social Security Investment Fund. But nothing much has happened. But now with new leaders and so on, maybe that will happen. But that is what that showed. So
my final question for you is then, in terms of, do we have a hindrance because of the red tapes involved, and because it is a long-term fund?
Well, there is some hindrance, because in the countries where foreign investment is not, it's forbidden, the legislation would have to change to allow that, because otherwise persons would be violating the legislation, and that would not be very good at all. That's just not acceptable. So those changes would have to be made in other countries, you'd have to also, in all of them, you'd have to maybe revisit their investment policies, because their investment guidelines also have limitations on the percentage that can be invested. And so I would advocate a study, or maybe a new study to be done, to look at the amalgamation of the investment portfolios, or if not all of it, but some of it as a joint investment for the OECS, ECCU region.
Okay, do we have a question? Yes.
I have a question. Quite often,
Just a second, they're going to give you a microphone so that everybody can hear you. Don't forget, we have one presenter left. We'll be coming to him in just a few minutes.
quite often you hear the comment, and you made it several times in your presentation, investment diversification. This has always been a question, because we hear it all the time. You must diversify your investment portfolio, you must diversify. How do you go about diversifying the portfolio when the investment opportunities are extremely limited, both within your island or country, and as you indicated, you need volume to go overseas? In addition to that, the same people who advocate investment diversification have also suffered from investment losses in the present climate. And in Social Security, in dealing with pension funds, one of the things we were advised by the World Bank was that a return of 6% on your portfolio was considered acceptable.
Okay, that's a nice, big, happy question. But one of the countries I always use as an example to show why investment diversification is critical, is Montserrat. You will remember when we had the volcano eruption in Montserrat? Montserrat Social Security, one of the reasons why it survived and was able to sustain itself without needing government injection, was Montserrat was one of the Social Security that had a wider diversification with its funds invested in the UK, a lot of its funds. So it is important, and the question you ask is, yes, if every investment, there is a risk. So there is a risk, but the question is, risk can be optimized and managed. And that is why the Social Securities need to ask themselves the question, because the fundamentals of investment is the same. You have three criteria in terms of what your objectives are. Do you want return? Do you want liquidity? Do you want capital preservation? And the answer to this question will determine the portfolio. So while, yes, there has been a lot of ups and downs in the markets in recent times, and many persons have made losses, everyone has not made losses. It depends on what you invest in. And so for Social Securities, given that Social Securities, they are long-term funds, so they can maybe take a little bit more risk than others. However, because again, it's people's money held on trust, you want to, in a way, manage that. And so capital preservation would have to be one of the, stand maybe high, and then that would determine some of the investment. So you will say,
Capital preservation also determines the rate
yes,
of return.
yes,
Because once you go for capital preservation,
yes,
the rate is going to be low.
exactly. So it means you cannot invest in junk bonds. That's a no-no. So it means if capital preservation is what you're looking for, you're going to invest in AAA, AA, A+, investment grade instruments only. You then do the diversification, whether it's in bonds, whether it's in equity, what percentage, and you do a structured stuff, because you must have some for local investment. Because remember, we said Social Security has to play a role in economic development in our region. It is critical. So there has to be a portion that is for local investment. Then hopefully the stock markets will, and maybe Social Security start investing a little bit more, maybe ECSC and the regional securities market would buoy a little bit more. So again, there are opportunities there, and then to complete that portfolio, you have to do some foreign investment.
Over here, you have a question right over here, yes.
Well, Mr. Pistana asked my questions, but I guess I'll just ask another one. During my time here as an employee at Social Security, I've been asked by the general public on various occasions, would it make sense for Social Security to provide loans to persons who contribute without competing with the banks? I get that question a lot.
Well, it depends. Some social securities do provide loans. Some social securities provide education loans. Some social security provide housing loans. So again, but you would have to do an assessment for social security here to determine. In fact, the Singapore social security is the social security, if you're looking for a model in terms of do we invest, provide loans to our contributors, the Singapore social security is the one you want to pay attention to. Because that is the social security, maybe one of the highest rates of social security. And it's interesting, there was a study that was done, and when it showed that people were generally happy, even if their rates were so high. And some US from NBER, they're like, and that study couldn't be correct. So they went and they ran their own study, and it came out correct, that people were generally happy. And they're like, how can you be happy paying so much? But one of the reasons the persons they advocated, they said, because we can see what our investment is. They see it as an investment. Because Social Security Singapore provides loan for sickness, for education, for housing, for a variety of things. So their conditions, of course. So persons see that they benefit from their contribution. So they don't see the contribution even as a contribution. They see it more as an investment where they can get returns by providing. So yes, and they are within our region. Dominica Social Security for years provided an education loan, but they have now moved that to, I think, the Aid Bank. Antigua Social Security had done a housing loan. So Grenada had done both education and housing. I think they still have them, they still run them. So their social securities have done that.
Okay, we have a question.
Yeah, I wanted to wait, I have a few questions. I wanted to wait until the end after the three presentations, but the way the conversation is developing, I think I want to ask this, well, not make a comment, basically, because we're talking about investment and loans and that kind of thing. I don't know if Dr. Henry is familiar with our system of the Provident Fund from the beginning. The Provident Fund was supposed to be a sort of national savings, a kind of compulsory savings. And I think we missed an opportunity. I would like you to comment on that, because the Provident Fund was supposed to be there as a kind of savings for individuals, the members of the fund, and it would have sort of emerged into a sort of sovereign wealth fund, and it would have been there in people's account, and we're just talking about loans for education and housing and so on, and that is what it was supposed to do, as we discussed the Provident Fund then. There as a fund to provide personal assistance for the individual contributors who contributed on that. And I'm suggesting that we missed an opportunity when we just gave back the Provident Fund, rather than leaving it for what it was intended to do, a sort of sovereign wealth fund to kind of provide people with an opportunity to for education and mortgage and the whole range of stuff. I don't know how familiar you are with that, but that is what I understand our National Provident Fund was supposed to do when we converted to Social Security.
Well, Social Security was deemed to be the upgrade of the National Provident Fund, because the National Provident Fund was, yes, a savings, so the contributor paid and the employer, and that fund was given when they retired. And so most persons, but they got it into a lump sum. But the experience of the persons who had received that lump sum, for some of them, that was the first time they were seeing so much money. And within no time, that money that was meant to have been to assist in old age disappeared. And so the Social Security was deemed to be an enhancement to the Provident Fund, because in addition to just the savings. You didn't get that lump sum of money, you got a pension that lasted to life. As well as while you are contributing and working, you're entitled to sickness, maternity, employment injury, survivor's benefit. So Social Security is deemed to be an enhancement on the Provident Fund because it now provides you with not a one-time lump sum, but it provides you with a pension to life, however long you live. And the truth is, for most persons, they will have gotten back more. The average for getting back all you have put in, even at the high end, is about 4 to 5 years of receiving a pension. You would have received every cent you contributed. And for persons on the lower end, within 6 months to a year, everything they've contributed, they've gotten. So it is meant to be that. But the question then becomes, is in terms of the opportunities and the diversification of the portfolio, the question then becomes, does Social Security provide loans? So there are two arguments on that. Social Security is not really in the business of doing loans and so on. And if you notice, a number of our Social Securities, what they have done, they have provided the funds to some of the financial institutions who then would provide the loans at special rates. And so that way they get back a return. So they might say, okay, I'm going to give you $6 million, and that $6 million is for the micro and small businesses. You must lend it to them at 3% or 4%. Or we want 4%. The bank might lend it to them at 6%. They get 2 on the top, and Social Security gets a 4. So those arrangements have been done within our ECC. So you can, but again, that would have to be a policy decision taken by a board, and in some cases, it would have to be approved by the minister responsible for Social Security.
Okay, so we are going to hear from our Mr. Haynes, our last presenter. Before we do that, Dr. Henry, you mentioned Montserrat. Interestingly enough, I was listening to a debate about a week or two ago, and they're in trouble now because of the volcano and the numbers. So many people went away, and so the numbers they have on the island now, their Social Security is in trouble. So there again comes the numbers. Okay, so our final presenter, Mr.
Excuse me, before the final presenter, there's a question or comment online. Commenters, you can also, if you wish to comment, you can do so on the live or via the Zoom. Just place your question, we'll be happy to read it. This comment says, Dr. Henry, your seminal study and investigation into the structure, governance, and performance of the Social Security organizations in the Caribbean is a must-read literary masterpiece for all persons holding significant responsibility for Social Security.
Thank you to the commenter.
Okay, so we now go to Mr. Haynes for his presentation. Mr. Haynes is joining us virtually.
All right, thank you, moderator. And I want to establish, protocol have been established eloquently. I wish to recognize the former minister, the former chairman, the newest CEO on the block, Christopher Ward. Welcome to the Social Security family in the leadership position. We look forward to working with you, the panelists, staff, management, and our esteemed audience. It's really a pleasure for me to be having this conversation under the theme Transform, Reform, Thrive at 45. And I would be giving a regional sort of a perspective. Also, I wish to recognize Social Security Syndicate on the occasion of its 45th. But this year, also, Antigua is celebrating its 50th. I want to recognize Antigua. And also, Grenada will be celebrating its 40th this year as well. So we have few systems celebrating milestone. So the roadmap to transform, reform, strive at 45. We're going to look at some key fundamentals of Social Security. We're going to look at how we deliver the Social Security promise, the current situation, the future outlook, and the transformation and reformation of Social Security. So, it was established by my colleague, Ms. Johnson, that Social Security provides a protection for individuals and households. So Social Security brings together two important words: society and security. From the aspect of society, Social Security ought to promote the principles of equity. We need to be fair to all stakeholders. Solidarity, we are in this business together. We are our brother's keeper. And universality, we're not leaving anyone behind. The formal, the informal, the self-employed, we are covering you. And from a protection standpoint, we would want to establish certain goals. For instance, sustainability, being able to meet our obligation in full and on time when they fall due. We have to ensure the benefit we provide is adequate, dignified. Then the contribution rate we charge must be affordable on part of employers and employees. And importantly, Social Security is an intergenerational business. So we can't transfer the burden of Social Security to our children and grandchildren from not making timely reform. So this Social Security is a buffer fund designed to support governments in the implementation of a defined Social Security benefit. It's an income replacement program. The fund intends to be perpetual because a multi-employer plan and achieve human dignity through income redistribution from low income to high income and also through poverty alleviation. Debate around our contribution to human development by responsible investments, whether in housing, in education, health, and economic growth initiative. We need to play a role in terms of contributing to socio-economic development. How we deliver this promise, this Social Security promise, the design of the system is important. In the region, we opted for what we call the defined benefit plan. Under this plan, how much, when, and how long you get your benefits are defined by law, as opposed to the alternative, a defined contribution, where the law will define the contribution rate. The amount you receive depends on your earnings and your years of service. So this promise to pay arrangement really is based on unknown. The important thing, we have this defined benefit plan, is how do we pay for it? How do we finance it? So we adopt what we call a pay-as-you-go system. And under a pay-as-you-go system, the current workers, like myself, will pay for current pensioners, for instance, my mom. And excess contributions are invested in various asset classes, be it deposits, be it bonds, be it loans, be it equities, real estate. But from the design and financing aspect of Social Security comes risk. Although we are established to protect our society against certain risk, in providing that protection, we face a myriad of risk. For instance, my colleagues mentioned about the demographic risk. Population aging is challenging us in the region. On the economic side, slow and low economic growth will stifle the growth of Social Security. There were conversations on the financial aspect of it. The whole market risk mean movements in the prices of bonds and equities from international investment. 2022 was a very painful year for institutional investors. Actually, the bonds and the stock markets fell the lowest ever in about 50 years. And the political risk also must mention, and this political risk is around the timely reform, timely implementation of reform measure. Dr. Valda mentioned a bit on that. I've looked basically at the OECS and Barbados in terms of giving a synopsis with regards to the regional experience. So a synopsis of the current financial situation. The average age of the regional social security systems are 44, 1 year lower than St. Kitts. And the age range from 33, the lowest, to 56. And none of these systems have been fully matured. What we notice is that the total expense as a percentage of your wages are still rising. But importantly, as at 31st December 2019, these social security systems amassed 13.9 billion in reserves, a representation of about 36% of the GDP under OECS plus Barbados. When we look at the funding levels across the region, it ranges from 2.7 to 20.1. So the funding level is somewhat uneven across countries, but the average funding is 9.1. And the funding mean, when we look at one reserves and we divide it by the benefit, meaning our reserves can carry us for about 9.1 years if there are no changes. Social Security also pay benefits on an annual basis, and pensioners participate in the economy. So we contribute what we call an economic boost. Through the region, Social Security in 2019 paid 1.7 billion in benefits, which represent to 4% of GDP. So across the region, the annual payment represents from 2 to 7% of GDP. That shows our stimulation to the economy from the demand side of things. Not only funding is important, but what is critical is cash. As we'll say, cash is king. So we look at the cash flow sufficiency across 4 different stages. So in stage 1, Marilyn referred towards the inflection point. In stage 1, we look at where contribution income exceeds total expenses. Currently, only one social security system in the region is at stage 1. So they're still building reserves by the contribution. In stage 2, where contribution income together with investment income are used to pay total expenses, where positive cash flow, there are 5 social security systems in the region at stage 2. And as things get worse with regard to financial challenges, we have 4 social security systems in the region as of 2020 in stage 3. And stage 3, you're using contribution income plus investment income plus a part of your assets, meaning you're starting to divest your reserve to pay expenses. So in this stage, you're in severe financial challenges, and urgent reform is necessary. Thankfully, we're not at stage 4, any of the system. But if we don't make timely reforms, then systems can end up in stage 4. That is where additional resources are required. For instance, enshrining some laws, if there are temporary deficiencies, then you tap in to the consolidated funds of government, but we are not there as yet. So all the social security systems in the region has reserved to cover their expenditure. But let us take a look at the future, how the future looks. When you look at the contribution rate across the region, the average contribution rate is 11.4%, and contribution rate range from 8.5 to 18%. When we compare that to the contribution rate that is required for Social Security to meet all its obligations over typically a 60-year period, it's 22.5. So we look at, for instance, all the systems in the region, OECS plus Barbados, and to meet all your benefits over a 60-year period, on average is 22.5% of contribution rate required. But again, this is uneven. Some countries at 13.5 to 31%. But what does this mean in the context of financial sustainability? Because that rate, we call it the general average premium, the fixed contribution rate over the long run exceeds the current rate, then all the systems in the region are financially imbalanced because your long-term contribution rate exceeds your short-term, right? So there's structurally financial imbalance. So reform is necessary to bring some stability or some financial balance. So what you'll find is reform towards moving from your current rate towards the general average premium rate or the constant contribution rate to cover your benefit over the projection period, because all of these systems are required to do what we call actuarial valuations that assess the sustainability of these systems over, let me say, a 60-year period. So there's this financial imbalance because the difference between this rate called the general average premium and our current contribution rate. Again, we talk about the financial evolution of the plan. We look at what we call the financial sufficiency period, the fund depletion period. On average, this looking at the current year 2023 to when the funds of Social Security would be totally depleted. On average, it will take 19 years on average in the region. And again, it's uneven. In a country, it's 3 years until the fund fully depleted. In another country, it's 40 years. So when we look by decades, in the 2020s, one Social Security system fund will be totally exhausted or depleted in the 20s, importantly, if no changes are made to contribution rate and benefit provision. In the 2030s, will be 4 Social Security systems. In the 2040s, 2 Social Security systems will be funds will be fully depleted, 1 in the 2050s and 2 in the 2060s. There are none in the 2070s. So this speaks to the year in which the funds will be fully exhausted if there are no changes in contribution and benefit provisions. But this is a natural consequence of the design. Because we partially funded, we're not meeting all of our obligation, then there must come a point where the fund over a projection period are exhausted. So there's no need for populace to panic at this point. The systems are designed in such a way that is a pay-as-you-go and also it's partially funded. So because it's partially funded, there will be a period where the fund is exhausted. But the important thing is what happened at the date the fund is exhausted. Social Security shop does not close up. What happened is that in some jurisdiction, the government now will step in to meet that deficiency. For instance, in the case of St. Vincent, at that period of fund exhaustion, the current contribution rate will just cover about 66% of the benefit. So the balance 36% would have to be covered by the government. And that is basically typical throughout the region. But how are we going to reform the reformation of Social Security? So we have to look at the financial management ecosystem for sustainability. And we have to make a conscious effort about balancing the different policies. Risk management policy is very, very critical for our Social Security systems at this stage in our operation, where we operate in a very volatile and tumultuous environment. It's important for us to develop and implement a risk management policy that speak to risk at an enterprise level. We manage risk by and large, basically not on a sort of an enterprise level, but by in a very disseminated fashion. So we need to align our risk management. And this risk management policy should have clear the risk appetite and the risk tolerance of the system. And it will reflect how we identify risk, how we assess risk, how we manage risk, how we monitor risk, and more importantly, report on risk. So the enterprise risk management policy is critical. And also a funding policy. So the funding policies speak to our long-term cost of social security. In the region, this policy is not popular, but there are a few initiatives around the region with regard to developing a funding policy, and this is critical because it sets a framework for the financing of social security benefits in the long run. And in such policy, what you can fashion is automatic triggers. So for instance, we could say the contribution rate can move based on the cost of social security. And also you can say the retirement age can move as a result of life expectancy, and benefit increases to make sure that the benefit we provide is adequate. And this are kind to put in social security on an automatic sort of on autopilot. So therefore it mitigates the political risk of timely reform measures, because changes in contribution rate, retirement age, and other elements of the benefit now will be a function of objective variables. So the funding policy can speak to some degree of automatic triggers to fund social security. And the other piece is on the investment policy. Dr. Henry mentioned about investment being a critical component to sustainability, and that is correct. But we need a framework, a blueprint in terms of how do we make investment. So we need guidance around the governance and the operational framework of social security. And also we need clearly defined objectives and strategic asset allocation. Where are we placing our funds? And importantly, it should consider the liability profile of the fund, because too many funds would invest just looking at the asset side. But the reason why we hold assets is to meet our obligation. And it's important that the investment policy will take account of the funding policy or the liability side of things. So once we have these three policies aligned, then we would improve in terms of the financial management of our system. And when we look at the transformative aspect of social security, I call it the non-parametric or the administrative reforms, then we're looking at some key sort of priorities. Some were exposed by my colleagues, but customer service has to be center. We have to be people-centric. We have to foster this service culture and deliver value-led services. Social security is a fundamental human right, and we as social security practitioners need to promote good quality customer service, customer-centric business. Also, we need to look at our resources. Human resource strengthening is important, and capacity building, especially in a time where our sort of a contextual environment is changing. We need to keep abreast or keep our competence up to date. And the era of digitization and digitalization also have to assist with the transformation of social security. Through the region, COVID-19 basically gave us a glimpse of the future in terms of how we were able to scale up from a social security delivery standpoint, a lot of our systems introduced what we call online services, and through the region, almost 6 social security systems at this point is changing the management systems so that they can better deliver social security services. Coverage is also important. We have to be very inclusive as it relates to social security coverage. And we are broadening in terms of the benefit offerings. I see Grenada very advanced with the introduction of the unemployment benefits in the region, and Turks and Caicos also introduced recently the unemployment benefit. There are countries like Dominica, St. Lucia, Jamaica, St. Kitts giving consideration or doing a feasibility assessment on the unemployment benefit, because we have covered all the other contingencies, involuntary, that lead to loss of income, but there is room for improvement as it relates to coverage for the unemployment benefit. And this is a challenge on the global level. It's not just on the regional level. Our self-employed and informal sector, we have designed social security systems based on a formal sort of an arrangement, but we need to meet the needs of our people. Post-COVID-19, most jobs that are created in the region are informal in nature. And for us to remain relevant and sustainable, we have to be more relevant to the self-employed and informal sectors. We have to listen to them, and we have to design our system such that we meet their needs. Because next 20 years or so forth, the labor market will be tilted towards more on the informal side of things, especially when a lot of companies scale up on a digital front. And public confidence is so important. How often do we come to the public with regards to reform? We need to engage in sustained social dialogue. We need to be better advocates of social security and not just administrators. I think in the region, too many times when we hear about social security, is through the mouth of politicians and so forth. But I'm encouraging my colleagues and staff of social security, let us be advocates of social security. As Dr. Henry said, let us promote good governance, because the social security is a fundamental human right, and we need to respect that and be transparent in our operation going forward. So, SSS, Social Security System, as Dr. Henry quite eloquently established, is the only income pillar for some persons. So, retirement pillars typically have your employer, what you put aside for yourself, and Social Security, a three-legged stool. But our Caribbean realities show that we most of the time have one leg, and that one leg is Social Security. And it gives the significance of us in terms of touching lives and livelihoods. Social security systems throughout the regions are not in a crisis position, but we face medium and long-term sustainability challenges. I mean, population aging in terms of life expectancy. We've seen a significant increases with regards to our pensioners, and the contributors are not growing as fast due to factors of employment, migration, and different sort of a demographic issues. Our systems, based on international standards, are generous in design. Very front-loaded, meaning we pay high benefits for early years, then we reduce in the latter years relative to the contribution rate. And we are maturing. And as you mature, because this is a plan that pay you based on years of service and also your salary, as you work, typically we see wages increases and also the number of years you contribute to the systems also increase, so the pension would increase. But we need to think of Social Security and act generationally and not situationally. We can't just respond to current situation, but we have to look at our children and grandchildren and think on the long term and generationally. We need to show up in terms of Social Security system. There's a lot of misinformation around the region on Social Security and where we go, but let us not throw the baby with the bath water. So I want to thank you for your attention. Moderator, I turn it back over to you.
Okay. Thank you very much, our final presenter, Mr. Haynes. Thank you very much. Well, why don't we see whether or not we have any questions from the audience first with regards to Mr. Haynes, and then, of course, the earlier presenters. Yes, we have a question here.
Yes, Mr. Hayes, I like the point you made about public confidence. I think a point was made earlier about politicians getting involved in, when actuaries make recommendations to increase contribution rates and so on, and they might not be receptive to these changes. So I think the public confidence would, stimulate the minds of the voting populace across the region, and stimulate conversation and let them know that it is impactful on their, their well-being and so on. So I think that's a really good point. It can curb, the political interference and so on. Once they are educated and how it affects them, then I really think that would make a change. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Excellent, I agree.
Go ahead, Mr. Haynes.
So clearly in terms of public confidence, because we've been challenged with this through the region, and clearly, as I indicated before, that we need to be advocates of Social Security. We need to be transparent. Dr. Henry mentioned with regards to the initiative of Dominica with regards to having this annual conversation, and I think we owe it to our citizens, our people, our contributors to report on our stewardship on an annual basis. Yes, by law, we do the annual sort of a financial statement. We furnish it to the minister. We do every 3 years our actual valuation, but that isn't good enough in terms of building public confidence. We need to talk to the public. We need to get them more engaged and participate in Social Security. We very good in terms of talking customers and so forth, but we need to live it. When we design in system, for instance, I indicated 6 of us. Changing our management system. Where are the voices of the self-employed and the informal sectors in shaping what we do, in designing this program so that we can be relevant and meet their needs? And also, we need to engage in this sustained social dialogue, meaning we approach the tripartite element, where we deal with employers, employees, government, but we have the wider civil society to have conversation with, and also our pensioners. And once we encourage persons to engage and to ask questions, then that would hold us as administrators accountable, and also policymakers, legislators will be held accountable as well. We just need more sort of a public engagement in Social Security. We can't look at it in terms of where we only come to Social Security when there's some contingency, sickness or so forth. We need to engage on a regular basis, and we need to build Social Security literacy in schools, primary, secondary, and so forth as well.
I get the impression, am I correct, that your view, based on your professional determination, is that education, from a practical standpoint, and not just saying education, but effective education, is the very tantamount to the success of Social Security funds?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely is very critical. I mean, we in some countries, self-employed and informal sector, you know, it's voluntary in terms of contributing to Social Security. And the question I would ask myself, if Social Security was voluntary for all categories of workers, what would our coverage rate be like? That's the question. Then what are the factors that will cause our coverage rate? So one of the key issues is the understanding gap and also the level of engagement in terms of Social Security leaders and the populace, and engage, educate them, create avenues for them to share the views, and also not only share the views, we have to act upon the views and the opinions of our populace, and that would help build in terms of the confidence with regards to Social Security. So it's a very critical component with regards to advancing Social Security in the future, because we don't want to miss generations, for instance, and the current generations really is a generation that want the voices to be heard. And if you ignore the voice, sorry, that they won't be so inclined to really participate in Social Security program. So we want the youths, the kids and so forth to really start engaging us at the Social Security level about what we do, why we do what we do, and so forth, so that they can be more informed on the role that we play in terms of touching lives and livelihoods.
So that's the job that needs to be done. So here's the million-dollar question. Who should do it?
Right. Well, we are administrators and we know this business better than anyone. And we need to do it individually and collectively. Like, I applaud the leadership of Syncit Social Security. We're having a conversation on the 45th anniversary, and they saw it fit to invite in terms of voice from St. Vincent. So a collaborative approach is also needed. A member of our audience asked a question around in terms of amalgamation of OECS, because typically if you look at an actuarial report for St. Vincent, look at one for St. Kitts, look at one in St. Lucia, you won't know a difference, just a variation. So we face the same challenges, but in different sort of spaces. Regionally, we are doing a fantastic job with regards to working together. But there are room for improvement, opportunities for improvement with regards to functional cooperation. Dr. Henry mentioned about the initiative in terms of pooling of resources and reserves. That is still on the agenda. Actually, I chair the planning committee for the next Heads of Social Security meeting, and I was given the task to really enliven that sort of initiative, because, I mean, operating individually not going to benefit us at all. So we have to work collectively and see where there are opportunities for functional relationship. Actually, that's part of addressing the sustainability issue, because let us look at the current situation now. St. Vincent, St. Kitts, Dominica, Antigua, Anguilla, Belize, all 6, Trinidad, and Guyana is contemplating, thinking of changing the management systems that we operate on, so that we can deliver our Social Security services more efficaciously. And all of us doing it on an individual basis. And if you add up the cost of implementing the program, then it would be very high. So these are initiatives around ICT, actual valuation, investment, that we need to collaborate a bit more so that we can, serve and address the issue of sustainability on a regional basis. So yes, we're working individually, but evidence that we need to work collectively for us to really move this needle and service delivery and managing administrative costs in these times.
Okay, do we have any other question from the audience? Yes, we do.
This question was to Ms. Johnson. It says, does Social Security notify employees of their employer's delinquency? Should employers in such a situation be given an opportunity, should be given an automatic legal right to the sum unpaid plus all interest to SSB plus an additional award to the wronged employee?
Okay. Social Security provides a contribution statement. Some time ago, we instituted it where we would provide such a statement on an annual basis. We had many challenges with it because generally our people do not come in and update their addresses. So we had many of these statements being returned to Social Security. However, we have stopped just automatically sending them out. We are hoping that with a new, more efficient system and with persons updating their mailing addresses, etc., and not only mailing now, providing email addresses, etc., telephone numbers so that we can communicate with you via your phone or email. Once we have that, we'll continue or we'll again make sure that we automatically send statements out to our insured persons. However, we still provide statements to persons on request. So any insured person can come to the Social Security office and request a contribution statement which we'll provide for you, and it will give you an indication of whether your employer is paying or not, or if they're paying the correct thing. Not only that, if you know that your employer is not paying your contribution, you can come to the compliance department and make an official complaint, and they will follow up on it. There was a second half of the question. What was it?
Is there, hold a second, I want to read verbatim. Should employees in such a situation be given an automatic legal right to the sum unpaid plus interest to the Social Security plus an additional award to the wronged person?
No, we don't do that. We do not do that, but what we do, we go after the employer and ensure that he pays the contribution, because it is very difficult for us to pay pay benefits when we are not getting the contributions for those to finance those benefits.
Another one for Ms. Johnson. We hear a lot about reform, and even this evening it was mentioned. Can you quickly explain what reform is about and how it can help the individual contributor?
Okay. Reforms are initiatives to change, we call them parametric reforms, meaning that there are changes to the variables of Social Security. For example, increasing the age, the pension age, which means that more people have to wait longer to qualify for the age pension. Also increasing the contribution rate. Currently we pay 11%, and there is room for increase in the contribution rate, which will ensure that we have a larger fund built up to finance our benefits. Also improving our investment performance, and the change in the formulas for the calculation of benefits will also go towards sustaining the fund, making it last a little longer. Remember, the equation is contribution plus income, investment income. is equal to your benefits and administration expenses. And we heard talk about looking at our administration and seeking ways to control our administration costs. So the reform initiatives are in place to ensure the sustainability of Social Security, which in essence will benefit every insured person, every member of the Social Security Fund. Because if we are not sustainable, it means persons who will reach 62 and they are not sure whether they will get their pension or at the rate that they expected to get it at. So it would be, and how long you'll be able to get those pensions.
But did I understand someone of the presenters, or more than one, to say that our fund has a trigger system in it, whereby when, or that's an option, that whereby if we, the fund runs low, the government will make an input from the consolidated fund?
But again,
did I hear something to that
no,
effect?
it's the funding policy.
Okay, so
Yes,
then, so can I get some elaboration?
Okay.
Elaboration
Bring
on
some
that?
clarity to that. So, in the case of St. Vincent, by law, if our fund enter into deficiency, right, meaning the fund dried up, deplete, then the government, we will tap into the consolidated fund to meet that temporary deficiency.
But
by law
that's
in
St. Vincent. How about
County.
St. Kitts Nevis?
Yes,
Do
Social
we know?
Security has that provision.
Social
St. Kitts has, correct.
Okay, so then in that regard, the contributors need not worry too much, right?
Not
Well,
necessarily.
No, well,
No,
no.
I'm just asking.
No.
I'm
I think every Social Security in our region has that clause.
Yes, it does.
But there's also something behind that clause. So yes, the government the law says the government will make the shortfall. But the question is, if the government itself is having its financial difficulties, will it be able to make it shortfall? So you cannot depend solely. So the Social Security, even while that is a backup, cannot use that as an excuse to not manage efficiently and effectively.
I was not suggesting they do
No,
that.
no.
I was just suggesting against the backdrop.
Yes.
Against the backdrop of education to be forthcoming. It is there,
Yeah, it's there.
right?
It's there.
And you know, we want people to know. No, we don't want people. Do we have any other question from online or the audience? Okay. I think we are depleted, not Social Security, but time. So, can we get a final comment from each of the panelists? Let's begin with Mr. Haynes. Oh, we have, okay.
Thank you. We keep saying, and I hear that all the time, that, education, right? I want to suggest we shouldn't be using education loose like we do. I think it needs more than just general education. It needs indoctrination. People have to understand that Social Security is essential for the community. You can't exist without Social Security. I mean, could you imagine what this country would have been looking like without Social Security for the last 45 years? And could you imagine what it will look like if we don't have a Social Security? So it isn't just education. I mean, 3 lovely presentations here tonight. Who hear them? How far they can go? It is a daily process, including the Minister of Government. They need education on Social Security as well. What it is about, indoctrination, yeah. And so, every fifth former, there must be weekly lectures at the fifth form and the Clarence Fitzroy Bryan College and the fifth form in St. Kitts and Nevis, the the Charlestown and Gingerland and all the secondary schools here, people must understand when they come out of school in fifth form and at college, what the working life is going to be and their role and responsibility in Social Security. We have to understand what the concept of Social Security is in terms of what you call it, equity and solidarity and universality. You know, we have to understand what I mean, you just can't leave that to 3 lectures tonight. I mean, that must be done on a daily basis, like a weekly basis in the schools, and generally throughout the country, not just what it is, Social Security and you, on the radio sometimes. I mean, this thing has to, people have to understand, is that indoctrination. We are talking about the growth of the informal sector. We need to reach out to the cooperative movement and see how they could embrace this informal sector and get it in a more organizational structure to understand the importance and the role of Social Security, what it means. I mean, like I said, we missed an opportunity some years ago with the conversion of Provident Fund to Social Security, and if we continue like we are going to miss an opportunity, and it's going to be, the last state is going to be worse than the first state.
Okay. All right, thank you very much. Just one more over in that corner.
Good evening. If I'm to piggyback on what Mr. Conde just mentioned, he spoke about indoctrinating. I believe that the community, the population, the stakeholders are aware that X percentage comes from their wage. What we need to ensure is that the employers, we need to indoctrinate the employers to make sure that they pay the contributions. Because what is happening, my money is being taken out on a monthly basis, and then when I check Social Security, none is being paid. So in order for the fund to grow, I believe it is important that we must hold employees' feet to the fire and ensure that they pay the required contribution for the employees. The fund would always have problem if these employers do not pay what they have to pay, because it is mandated by law that X percentage comes from an employee salary, but yet still we find from time to time that percentage is not landed where it ought to go. It is our investment. The same way you have a bank account and you can monitor what is on the bank account, we must have a system in place to make sure our investment, our Social Security investment, we can see where it is going, how it is growing, and if it is not going where it ought to go, then we bring pressure to the person who took out our money. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So we go to the wrap, Mr. Haynes.
Yes, so I'm very encouraged by the words of the two persons there that spoke. So I will do my closing link to what they say. I mean, it's important that this thing of Social Security literacy, like we look at this as the gentleman rightly said, as an sort of an induction process, right? Because the Social Security literacy now requires some energy around it. So we'll take a regional initiative around it. We'd also ensure, I mentioned on the financial management, there are policies around how you manage your assets, policies around your liability, policies around risk management, but also importantly, there need to be a structured, documented communication policy that focus on education at a societal level, and also there's some gap at our institutional level. There's unevenness with regards to Social Security knowledge. Whilst person know of Social Security. They don't know enough about Social Security. And there's a call to action for regional leadership, management and staff at Social Security to basically lead the way in terms of educating, bridging the understanding gap among our populace with regards to Social Security, because it's the cornerstone of any sort of a society. So social literacy we will promote as part and parcel of the 45th sort of a celebration. So I trust my colleagues will join me in that call to action in terms of enlivening social security literacy.
Thank you.
Thank you. Moderator, over to you.
Okay, Dr. Henry.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much. And Stuart Haynes made a point about being advocates for Social Security. And I think even from the discussion today is about advocacy. And I just want to end with a quote from the ILO and even from mine and epigraphs. The ILO says, "There is no lasting peace without social justice. There is no social justice without social security. There is no social security without sound financing." And I added that there is no sound financing without prudent investment. There is no prudent investment without good governance. And there is no good governance without men and women of integrity. And that integrity is critical for the public confidence, for the advocacy, and for persons to come on board that Social Security is all of us business. Thank you.
Thank you. And finally, Ms. Johnson.
Okay, thank you very much. It was a pleasure being here. I just want to focus on solidarity. Social Security involves and is for every individual in society. And so I encourage all of us to take an interest in our Social Security, own it, and do what we can to ensure the sustainability of our Social Security system. Together, we come together and ensure the sustainability of the fund. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, and I hope, based on the presenters and the input from the audience, we can go from the input that we got and continue that journey. Thank you all very much. Have a good evening.
You're listening to Vaughn Radio from the Federation of St. Kitts Nevis.
And you were just listening to a virtual panel discussion on the future of Social Security to observe the 25th anniversary of the Social Security Fund under the theme Transform, Reform, Thrive, Social Security 45. It is now 9:35.